Komt alles. Het zal vast er iets mee te maken.
Ze moeten zeggen dat ze de kaas geven.
Je bent aan de andere kant zitten bij.
Ja, oké.
That's the best view, no?
Now you have to ask a question. You have to be a good student.
Okay, welcome everybody. Great that you're here with so many. And we also have some 20 people, I think, online. And I hope they can hear us, lots of people. So, and I think we can also hear you. So if you have a question from the online audience, you can just shout out and we'll try to reply, or you can just type something in the chat and we'll see if we can get to that. Yeah, that's that. Well, welcome everybody. This is a Python meetup. I think our first. It's the first meetup after Corona. This is the first time being in a room with so many people. I think in quite some time. It's also the first time that we're doing it at the same company for the second time. So thank you, VIKTOR, for having us. Yeah, and we've got a nice program. So I'll be up first with telling something about Pandas and Excel tables. Second one, Rob van Putten, yeah, is over there. How Python helps to keep the Netherlands dry. Well, very interesting to hear how that works. Yeah, then for days over here, updating all Django websites with Docker. And finally, we have Matthijs, who's from VIKTOR, also static code analysis and code mods. I don't even know what code mods are, so interested to hear. What? We're here at VIKTOR, and I thought I'd tell something about VIKTOR, but I don't really know all the details. But this is the blurb from the website. They have a nice office, and then also they have quite a few Python developers that build a framework in which engineers and civil engineers, especially geotechnical engineers, I think they can use Python and the framework to parametric design and all this cool stuff that you need to do as an engineer, because who uses Excel anymore? Huh? Not done. And they're hiring, and this is some bit of the website. And we have in the audience Tamar, and she's the hiring manager of VIKTOR. So if you're interested in anything, just have a talk with her. Now myself, I'm Thijs Damsma. I work at Van Oort until now, actually until Monday is my last day officially, but I'm on leave. This is Van Oort. It's a really nice company, and they're hiring, especially senior Python backend developers, because. But also two of my colleagues and one former colleague have joined us here, so they're over there in the back. And what else can I say? Well, if you're wondering why is there this random stock photo here, that's on the website, so it's a really cool company. I'm going to work next week. I'm starting at Seed, and I'm going to work on the software for this machine, which is a 3D printer. Does large-scale 3D printing, and you just put plastic pellets in by the cubic meter, I think, and then 80 kilograms of plastic squirts out per hour, and you can build giant models. Additive manufacturing. It's really cool. I hope, at least.
It's not a small home one size.
No, this is so this would not fit in the room here. This bed is probably like 3 by 2 meters, and the height is probably 2.5 meters or something. And the robot cost in Infinity like 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 euros or something like that. But then they don't make the robot. They add this is the product. This prints, and this is you put the plastic in here, and then it feeds in here with some hoses and stuff. So that's what they do. And now for my talk. So as we have 4 talks, I'm trying to keep the tempo a bit high. So I want to keep it under, say, 90 minutes total. But let's see how quickly we can go, and of course how many questions you have. So this is just a little project I've been working on while I was at Van Oort, and it's open source. It's think the first official open source package in the GitHub repository. And well, I think I have the internet here, so I can actually use this instead of reading CSV files. So hopefully this works. This is what I'm going to do here in this notebook. It's actually open a CSV file from the internet or a data frame with the downloads of my of an open source package, Pandas X, that's X tables, which is made purely for my personal use. And you see the total downloads. It's not that impressive, but it's good enough. But I hope that maybe after you see my talk, that you're thinking, oh, this is really something I need and that can be useful for you. Now, what does it do? So I have this random CSV file here. Now, we all, I guess, we all use Python. You probably use Pandas, and you can do all these things like, okay, so now I plot all the downloads with and without mirrors, and you just chain a few methods, and then you always have to look at the documentation because who can remember what you can do? But if you pivot none and category and you plot it, then you have a nice plot. And then you'd say, as a proper Python engineer, I'm done. You give this plot to your manager or to your client, to your customer, and they'll be happy because they have a plot. Or not because they're like, no, actually, I want an Excel file. Please give it in Excel to me. At least I've had that request about 1 million times. So then, as a good Python engineer, you say, okay, let's do a data frame to Excel, and I'm calling it downloads1.xlsx, and I'm going to open it straight away, and hopefully that works. Yes, it works. And now I've got my Excel file, and I give this to my clients, and they'll start messing with it. You know how Excel goes. Then you say, date, I want to sort it by date. Maybe I can do data and sorting, and they're like, wow, this is really annoying. So I sort the values on order of dates, and then, okay, well, okay, and then I've got it sorted, and this is quite annoying. And then you use Excel and you figure out, actually, it's a really annoying program. But actually, if you're doing that, you're using it wrong. So there's a big secret in Excel, and it's called, it actually has a table, a tabular data format. And if you go to home and you say format as table, you would think this is just formatting, but that's wrong. It actually changes the data structure internally in Excel. So this is the most important feature if you're using Excel for anything. If it has a table in it, which I guess every Excel sheet I've ever seen has, use this format, use this option. The table has headers, and now I get a properly nice table. At least there's still some formatting ugliness because Pandas put in formatting that I don't want, and I have to clear the formatting, but the buttons are gone. And anyway, it's annoying. But now I have this format as a table. I can scroll through it. I can make it a bit larger, and you see while I'm scrolling down, the headers are still there. And if you know the freeze change options in Excel, and you can get in all this horrible mess to behaviors, but now it actually works automatically, and I can just sort it ascending, and now this at least behaves, let's say, more or less properly and intuitively. And well, so if you use Excel and you put data in it, you want to use a proper Excel table. That's basically what I'm trying to tell you. And if you have the table, then you can do much cooler stuff with it. However, to recall, how did we start? We started out with this, which is like some kind of horrible formatting. So some lines are black and others are not, and that's it. So why does Pandas export Excel files this way? Well, I don't know why, but the Excel code in Pandas is really, really complicated because it has many layers of abstraction, and it's also very slow. And I tried to change it, but I just couldn't get through it because there's so many dependencies. It's such a difficult package, Pandas, that I couldn't make a PR that was acceptable. So instead, I just made a separate package that does Pandas, and that has this method, df2xlsx table. And when you write that, this is actually a proper table in one go. So it's relatively simple. This table, this has a name. It's called downloads2 because that's what I named my sheet. And if I want to say summarize it with a pivot table, if you don't know how that works, now, because Excel knows the names of all my data, I can just say, well, I want the values, but I want them split out by category. And how about, oh, great. I've made it so large that the header is gone. Because there was a row here, but I cannot grab it. Oh, well.
Excel.
Excel bug. I never use a Mac for something that could be done on a Windows machine, I guess. So, okay, that's, oh, now I cannot move to the rows. This is getting embarrassing. The rows, oh, and now I have the same table. Again, I pivot it and I make it pivot. I make it a chart, so insert pivot chart. And this chart. That needs to go and move. So now I make it a line chart. And well, what we have here is basically the same chart we just created with Pandas, but now it's in an Excel file, which is probably more pleasing to your manager. So that's what I wanted to show you in short. If you use this function, df2 XSX table, then this is all taken care of in one go. Now there's, of course, the reverse is also possible. So I have this Excel file. It's called multiple tables. Can I open it? That would be great. Yeah, so just short trick here. Should have prepared this better so for everybody. Anyways, so this is a typical Excel file that has no structure and then everything is a big mess because that's how Excel files work. You know how it goes. So maybe as soon as you explain the table concept to your colleagues that are not programmers, they'll start using them everywhere, and then you use multiple tables on one sheet, which is wrong, but they might do it anyway. So now you try to read that with Pandas. It's not nice. So now you read it with XSX tables, 2 data frames, and voila, you have a dictionary with 2 data frames in it. So of course, you cannot do the reverse because I don't support the package where you can put multiple tables in one sheet. But if you supply it multiple tables, they will all be in their separate top, which is how you can. So that's in a nutshell my package. So it's called Pandas XSX tables, and you can find it on PyPI in the Van Oort GitHub repository.
Nice.
So that's that. Next up.
No questions.
Oh, yeah, okay, question, sorry. One thing I thought, yeah, maybe somebody will ask a question, but why I put the logo everywhere? I managed to put it on every slide. I get so many comments about the logo that I figured maybe I can overuse it.
What do you use in the background to actually write the Excel?
Yeah, one of those Excel, I think there's 2 toolboxes, and I use one or both. I forgot that. So
Excel.
yeah, Open Excel or Python XLSX-Writer. I'm sure I tried both of them, and they both have a different subset of functionality which makes them nicer or not to use. And I forgot which one I used. I'd have to check the source code. But I use the one that also allowed me to use. Well, they both work, but one of them allowed me to also assign the proper data types. So you kind of try to keep the data type. So if it's a text field, you write the Excel table with the text field, and if you put the float in it, you put number formatting with some decimal places, non-configurable, but at least some. And then who needs more than 3 decimal places? And if you put an integer, you get 0 decimal places, like something. So I kind of, so Excel data tables are actually typed more or less. It's sort of like less explicit than Python, but they have some concept of typing. I don't know exactly the details. So, yeah. And you try to match that, and Pandas, of course, can be explicitly typed. So try to match it up.
Yeah, I had a sideways question indeed on this formatting, because I had a similar experience, but then with Word 1.5 years ago. or use the Python docx package. And then there's all kind of Pythonic constructs to not have to care about the actual Word docx format, which is of course completely public and open source, but in a Microsoft way. So it's changed in subtle details. And then when you can do the default stuff, but as soon as I had to go in some details of and you were also showing here the tables, I was like, okay, if that's not supported in your package, then you have to use the escape hatch and start learning about, and then add those functions as well. And then you're kind of lost. So I was wondering if you had to do anything like that, or if the tables functionality was all supported by one of those.
Yeah, the tables functionality is all supported. It gets clunky very quickly. I chose for my package to use same defaults, what I consider same, and leave it at that. If you want to make it differently, then you'll read the source code and you can modify it as well. And it's just it's a few hundred lines of code, so it's it's easier to adapt it to your custom needs. But this is basically for the quick situation where I want better defaults than the standard Pandas Excel.
Cool.
I hope one day this will be the default behavior of Pandas, but I have no idea how to get that in.
So who will maintain this now that you leave Van Nooit?
Well, I'm still maintaining because it's open source, so it's that's also one of my motivations for open sourcing it, so I can actually keep contributing to it. But yeah, there is, and it's also quite simple. I think it needs too much weight.
Famous last name.
Monday morning. Source code.
Yeah. So now we're going to do the switcheroo and see if
There's an online question from Arjan, who asks, how is this different than pandas.excel writer?
That is there is some extra functionality in Pandas, and it's very, very convoluted, the standard Pandas Python code. So perhaps there's also more options I'm not aware of, but last time I looked into that in depth, it does everything wrong, and then you have to build on the wrong abstractions, while what you're doing is in fact really simple. Just don't use the built-in Pandas code, because Pandas has the Pandas Excel mod, at least in my opinion, is just one big garbage. Yeah, it's so the way it was built is that it had what I recall is that it had like all these abstractions so that you could put in Excel factories and this, but everything was implemented with only one version. So there were abstractions, but they were only used for a single purpose. And then if you try to extend them, you find out that the abstractions are wrong because they're not abstracting the right things. Which, of course, if you start abstracting something before you're using it in more than one way, it's usually a bit premature. So, but maybe I need to check it out. If you can put Arjen in the chat something, then if you have a good hint, that's something I missed, I will happily look into it. Okay, so switch time.
I should get a nice screen, but so far you have a mirror.
Makes the audience rather self-conscious.
Let's see.
Oh, forget
Zit iemand er hier tussen staan?
Ja, is het?
I think, yeah.
Oh, is het de webversie?
Ja, precies. Dat zit het.
Ja, die moet je even.
Helemaal.
Ja, want als hij zijn scherm deelt,
Sorry, ja, oké, dan moeten we die even.
Staat er op überhaupt tussen?
Ja, ik sta nu ook. Ja, het is een Chromebook met de webversie van 10 en een browser. Oké, dus die moet even mailen. En dan, ja. Matthijs, kan jij dan tussendoor?
Ja joh, tuurlijk. Oké. Let's see how that works.
Oh ja, zo. Ja,
Slideshow, ja.
Oh, wacht, moet ik nog stoppen met scherm delen? Is dat
Ja.
zijn?
Ja, nu deel ik dus mijn scherm. Ja, precies. Dit werkt niet. Even kijken.
Nee, dat is geen probleem.
Ah, lekker dit.
Is echt ingewikkeld.
Het is echt wel.
Lekker beunen. Eens kijken of dit werkt. Ik weet nu niet meer wat er allemaal gedeeld wordt en al dat soort dingen. Dat gaan we...
dan wel in de meeting, maar...
Oké, dan.
Hup. Kijk, nu heb ik in ieder geval 1 ding. Dat is makkelijker al. Hoppakee.
Yes.
Kun je het dan ook in de meeting zien? Werkt dat ook? Oh, nou, cool. Alright, yeah. So, yeah, I'm gonna present from here then, I think.
Alleen maar doortikken.
Ja.
Kan ik ook, ja?
Oh ja, dat is ook goed. Ja, dat is ook niet. Okay, top. Oh yeah, sorry, let's do this in English. Alright, my name is Matthijs Beekman. I'm working here at VIKTOR in the platform team. And I'm going to talk about static analysis and codemods and what that means. I'll tell in the next slide. So I'm going to talk about a problem you might have encountered before. And the problem is maintenance. It's not my favorite hobby, at least. And yeah, you've been depending on this nice package, all very cool and like maybe Thijs's package, right? And Thijs updates his package and completely changes all the function names. And there you're like, yeah, okay, thanks, Thijs. Probably it's better now, but I need to update all my scripts now. So I'm completely screwed. So this is at least a pain I have felt a few times before, and also something we as VIKTOR struggle with, because we deliver a Python package that people rely on to build their web applications, and we cannot just simply, if we change our minds, just switch over the complete interface and screw them over, basically. So that's a struggle we also as a company are dealing with. So can you move to the next one? So what we want to do instead is automate this stuff, right? It's not, you don't need any creativity per se. It's a rename or adding an argument to a function. Whatever, the computer can do this better. And there's lots of inspiration for this actually. At least that's where we got it from. So, that's not readable, is it? No. Okay. So a few languages have this concept introduced. So Rust, I think in their cargo minute, so the package manager has something like cargo fix. Go has it also, go fix, so that changes your code for you regarding new standards or new changes that they made to the language. And React as well. That's actually, I think, the original idea where we got it from. So Facebook had this problem internally. They were using React in a large part of their product. But they were also still developing that product. So they need to, keep that pace. You want to improve your system, keep it running, but also use it at the same time. So how are you going to do that? So they automated that because the maintenance burden was so high. So what can you do in that respect? So that's where they created React Fix. It's also present, I think, for all the users of React, so not just internally on Facebook. So that's nice that everyone who uses it can also benefit. So that's where we want to end up as well, right? So you want to have your package and not be bothered with all these manual changes. So that's where I want to end up at the end. So codemods, that's what the name is of this structure, at least that's how I call them. But before we get there, I'm going to talk very shortly about dynamic analysis versus static analysis. What is actually the difference, and what does static analysis has to do with actually with codemods? So that's roughly the outline of what I want to talk about. So yeah, the next. So dynamic analysis of code is probably best known, and I hope at least a few of you have written a test before. So how do you analyze your code? You analyze it by running it. So you just execute the code and you check the result, or you check that it doesn't error out, or whatever side effects you want to check So here's a simple example. You have a function called add values, and you check, yeah, if I add 2 and 3, the result should be 5. Well, very sufficient. It works. It's pretty simple to do, to check it this way. However, you can imagine that if add values is not 1 line of code, but 200, it might become a bit more problematic to test this correctly. But yeah, this is a nice way of doing analysis. Right, and then, so if you contrast that to static analysis, so that's the next slide. Does it go? Yeah, perfect. You don't actually execute the code, but you just look at the file or look at the code and analyze it in that way without running it. So if we have the example here on the right, there's another function called get birthdays. You have sort of a calendar with people and when their birthday is, and you ask me, okay, what birthdays do I have between the start date and the end date? Okay, nice. So I see that I type hinted this function. So I added, I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with the syntax, but this sort of the semicolon, the colon here, and the datetime says, okay, I put in a moment in time on start date, and the type of that is a datetime, and for the end date the same. So you know as a user of this function what to toss in, basically. But you don't care, you don't read what is there, so you just put in a tuple there, and you see, oh, it's all fine. If you read this, you can reason without running the actual code that this doesn't work. So in this case, this is a screenshot of PyCharm, but VS Code has this as well, or whatever your preferable IDE is. So they analyze the code in a static way, so they don't actually have to execute it and error out, but they can see, yeah, you're doing it wrong. You're putting in a tuple here, but it actually expects a date. So you might want to check this out, right? And of course, this is a bit, for people coming from other languages, this is super weird. So this is normally what a compiler does. So for static typed languages, this feels completely bullshit and sort of backwards. But yeah, we still have sort of the nice, you can have sort of, at least in my opinion, the best of both worlds, right? So you can leave out all the type-ins if you want to. I'm doing this responsibly, I don't care. But you can also put it in, make it a bit more robust, but it will not be checked during runtime. So this warning is nice, but you can still run it. It might error out. Might also be a false negative, by the way. So, but in this case, PyCharm is having it correct. Yeah.
Python ignores everything after the double dot. Python itself ignores.
Yeah, it ignores the type-ins on runtime at least. You can. There are packages who actually enforce this. Costs a lot of CPU cycles, by the way. So be sure to check it out before you introduce it. But yeah, this is not enforced. Yeah, so to look at static analysis in a bit more broader sense, you analyze the source code without running it, and you know, okay, yeah, so PyCharm knows, right? Okay, you have a function, you have input arguments, this is a type hint, it has this knowledge about what the text actually means. You don't have to run it, and the type checking was an example. So there are more examples of this. So actually the uses of this is, I think, rapidly growing in the Python community, so you see more and more tools. Because yeah, well, it started with everything is possible. It's super dynamic. Oh yeah, but now it's not maintainable. Okay, yeah, let's fix that. So these are a few attempts to solidify a bit the flexibility that you have. You can build everything, but it also might break a bit too easily. So MyPy is actually the tool that you can use to enforce what we just saw on the previous slide. So you can run that on your code base, and it will say error, and this line you have to fix. It also gives you a whole ton of false negatives, by the way. So also, again, be a bit careful implementing this a bit, because it will take a while. Actually, we had I think a presentation the previous meetup or one before, I'm not sure about this specifically, and also how you can introduce it in your code base if you're interested. So another one is PyLint. That's more on checking if you're not using protected members, or eval, I think it might be blacklisted. I'm not super sure. Bandit is a security tool. So for instance, if you are using an unmaintained XML package, that might not be the smartest way to do. It will warn you about that. Black is a code formatter, so you can enforce those standardization rules in your repository if you want to. So all these four, and there's a whole lot more, they sort of are based on the same principle. They don't run your code, but they analyze it. So they have a knowledge about the structure of how the text that you see in your code editor is actually what it means in a Python way and how Python actually uses in a way. And it then can tell you stuff about, hey, this might not be what you desired, or why don't you change it this way? And in black, they actually also run a modification step that they actually change your code. All right, next. So how does this work a little bit behind the scenes? So I don't want to dive in too much detail about this because it's a very deep topic. But in general, you can think about it as you read that code, you read that text, and you need to put it in sort of a smart structure, right? Because you can do it line-based, but then you have to strip out all the white space, which is not relevant in Python maybe. You need to put a lot of if statements per line. Sometimes you break it into multiple lines, so that might not be the right abstraction. So what they do is actually they put it in a tree, a syntax tree. So that syntax tree is a broken down representation of your source code, which more mimics how Python works internally, and that you can more easily manipulate or analyze. So it uses knowledge of the language, so it knows what the def is, that is a function definition. It knows what the star notation is for dynamic number of inputs. Those kind of things it knows about, and it will use that information and put that in the tree. So there are two types of trees. You have the abstract syntax tree. There's a Python built-in module called AST, which you can use to, well, you can read in a file and then dump the syntax tree and see how that tree looks. So Python uses this internally as well. You also have a concrete syntax tree. So there is actually also in the standard library lib to the tree that was built to facilitate an easier transition from Python 2 to Python 3. So you also have this modification of your source code from the old way of using a print with a space instead of a print with parentheses, for instance. And that's part of the standard library to also facilitate easier modifications of your code. However, that one is deprecated because Python is changing their grammar in 3.10, I think. A lot of details, doesn't really matter. Facebook has open sourced a nice libcst library that you can use to also, and that's actually what we're using behind the scenes as well. And it also on their read the docs, it also explains nicely what the difference is between those two, between an abstract syntax tree and a concrete syntax tree and what you can do about it. So there's a whole lot of things to read about this. I also put some links at the end of the presentation. I'm just going to leave it at that. There is a tree. And I have a small example in the next slide. So and on the left, you see the Python code, which is visualized on the right. So this is the tree representation of the code. So you have a function call, add numbers, 2 and 3. That's it. So this is really all the code. So there's no script around it. This is what it is. So, and there's a whole lot of things going on, but the most important thing is that you see, yeah, there's a function. We call it add numbers. You have arguments, and one is 2 and one is 3. That's it. But what the nice thing about this is you can imagine that this, so for a whole program, this graph will be huge, right? And you can loop over this graph, and you can identify, this is a function. Okay, let's check its name. If I want to change this name, I can then change it there, and I don't have to loop over the lines or write a horrible regex or whatever I want to do to change that name, and not have to worry about that it might be split over the different lines or that it might be indented in another way or whatever. That's all stripped out because the knowledge of the language is sort of inserted in this tree. So you don't have to use that abstraction yourself anymore. So yeah, what I said here, there are two examples. You can change a method name or add an input argument or whatever. I tried to play around with this a little bit and just say, hey, you know what, I'm just going to change this. In the tree itself, that didn't work. So probably libcst and other tools do something a little bit more smart than what I just tried in 5 minutes. So, but yeah, you can play around with it, and it should technically it should work. Yeah, let's go to the next one. All right, so now if we look back, so we started with static analysis that we represent the code that we have in a more smart way, in a tree structure that we can use to more easily analyze it, but also modify it. And that's what we want to use for the problem that we started with. So you want to, as a user of a library, which changes the signature of a function or added an argument, whatever, use that structure, change a small thing, and paste it back in your code, basically. So that's what I call, and what others also call, codemods, so code modification tools. And there are a few libraries for this. So Bowler is actually, I think, even a command line interface. It's also from Facebook. And libcst is sort of a more low-level framework you can use to build your own stuff with, roughly. I think also libcst was originated a little bit later than Bowler. I'm not super sure about the details about that. But those are at least a few tools you could use if you are interested in doing something with this. So how do we do this within VIKTOR? So we ship, at the end of the day, we ship a Python library, which clients, but also internal developers use to build web applications. And what we do is when we ship a new version of our SDK, which introduces a backwards incompatible change, we ship a code mod with it that you can use to update your code. This is not a holy grail solution. It doesn't work for every change, unfortunately. But it does for a big majority of cases. And also it makes it possible sometimes. So at one point in time, we decided to rename a significant portion of our classes and also the import paths associated with it. So we thought, well, for a long time, we sort of evaded that problem because it would have cost so much work for developers to update all their code. But with this in place, we could quite easily push it because it was just running a single command on a command line and you would have updated your code. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the proof's in the pudding, so I will show you how that works. So this is a snippet from our documentation. You can look it up if you want to. It's on docs.viktor.ai, but it doesn't really matter. In this case, it's about the change. So we have in VIKTOR, we have something called an option field. This is rendered as a dropdown in the web application. And we had the problem that this option field always auto-selected a single option. Well, the problem, a lot of clients like this very much. However, others didn't. So we wanted to make this configurable, but it wasn't. So, and we have hundreds of applications running. So if we change this overnight, stuff breaks and we get angry customers. So that doesn't work. So what we needed to do is make it configurable. So everyone needs to add this configuration for a while. And then we can change the default behavior, possibly. So this is the change. We want everyone to add a keyword argument in their code. So I prepared a short demo. So yeah, so the old way would be to, okay, yeah, good luck, and there you go. But as it says on the top, you can do it automatically by using the command line interface command, VIKTOR CLI fix, and then the number of this upgrade. So this is the number 69. We have, I think, now around 70. That way you can just apply the change you want to do. This is always a bit exciting, of course, if it works with a demo. Oh, this is not readable, is it?
The beamer is a bit high.
Yeah, okay. Let's see. So this is the source code of this application. Doesn't matter too much. But let's say I'm using this option field. So I'm going to do a search, right? How many times do I need to change this? So I do option field. Yeah, there we go. 45 occurrences. So maybe that's not even too bad. But you can see that the usage is quite high. So if you had to do this manually, that would be quite annoying. Some are also commented out. So yeah, maybe that doesn't even matter. But yeah, you get the point. So that doesn't really work. So let's try with a command. So we fix it with a certain number, in this case for the option field. And what it does behind the scenes is it uses this tree, right? So it builds up the tree of your whole source code. It analyzes where can I find this option field. Is it already modified? That's also an important question. Otherwise, if you reapply it, you get the same. You have two keyword arguments which are the same. Also annoying. And then it shows you all the changes. So if I actually, oh yeah, that doesn't work right. I think like this. Yeah, now maybe I need to zoom out a bit. Does that work? No, like this. Ah, there we go. Yeah, I'm gonna make it small, then you can at least see it. I can see it. Yeah, it will come up. There we go. So what it now says in the terminal is that this is for one file, and it asks me on the bottom, do you want to apply this diff? Yes or no? Okay, let's do it. Let's hope that the guys did a good job in writing the code mod. Another file. Yes, good idea. Good idea. I think you can also do yes all, but I'm not sure what the command is.
I have yes to it.
Now, and now it says on the bottom. Oh, I'm having a bit of trouble with this. There we go. The following files are modified to fix US69. These 4 are changed, and this is in Git, so I can just check that indeed these files are changed, and whatever to do with it, whatever I please. But yeah, that was a lot quicker than manually changing everything, you can imagine.
Can you easily show the code that specifies this change?
No, but I can pull it up. It's not really a problem, but I cannot do that right now. Yeah, it's not. So I think so. Maybe it's good to give an order of magnitude how large that is, right? Because that matters.
Yeah,
Probably.
yeah. Like, how difficult is it to say I want everything that says option field, and is it matching by a string or is it matching by that class object field?
I'm not super sure what the implementation here is. It could be so. Like this libcst library provides stuff like rename class as like a built-in thing. So it's quite high level. I think, not sure if we now match by string or also where it comes from. I think both is possible. It depends a bit on also the code mod that we want to produce, right? Sometimes we estimate that it does not really worth the trouble to make it sort of 100% true in all cases because we don't suspect that it will be better after 80%. And we just, sometimes we even put a regex after this fixed command, if that's good enough. But for the more difficult cases, we use this system.
And how are your developers happy there? Oh, another already at update 70. Come again.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, yeah, that's you still have to weigh, of course, that it takes effort. And I think one of the things that's more important than actually the effort is that you also have a mental model about how something works. So if we change the complete order of arguments, the naming and everything, yeah, you still, the first time you type it out, you probably type out the whole thing. So you have to learn it as well. So we still cannot drastically rewrite everything every day. But if we are convinced that it is better that way for the majority of developers, then at least the manual labor is no longer an argument. So that's a bit how we go about it. But we have discussions internally about some changes. Yeah, we can do this or we cannot. Yeah, I think the next slide is actually just a bunch of links. So that's more for sort of if you read this and you're interested. Yeah. So that's my presentation. Okay.
Is there any kind of security? So if you give me a library and a code mod, I don't know what the code mod does to do it by code.
Yeah.
Is there anything done related to that?
Well, yeah, in this case, we have a CLI that also starts your application, which runs within a whole framework. So you are already running sort of that executable anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't think it adds to that security risk per se. Yeah, actually, I think because it parses the code and it doesn't execute it, that I would expect it to be maybe safer than actually running it. I'm not sure. So you
can always sneak in. So
you mean the case to run this over untrusted code, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good question. So that's not the application we are using it for.
Yeah,
so
no.
I haven't thought about it before, but I would say so. There's a parser it uses to parse out and create this tree, but I'm not sure if it contains sort of real exact sort of logic and that kind of stuff. I think it knows sort of more on a textual basis. This is a space. This is a tab. This is a comma. So I think it should be pretty safe. I would expect. But yeah, and the grammar is limited, so it's not an infinite number of possibilities. But yeah, that would be my sort of guess. I don't know.
And the mod itself is like it's a Python file itself that describes the change at some abstracted level. So you have one called change 69.
Yeah, so in our source code, we just have a list indeed of use69.py with some code in it.
If I wanted to hide something, that's where I would stick it.
Yeah.
And then I would commit before you do this.
Yeah. So that's in this case, right? We're running a command line interface who does a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, it does a lot. already.
So yeah.
And you need to trust that anyway.
Yeah, but that's for you. Packaging and distribution, you download from HTTPS, have checksums on the packages you download when you install the updated VIKTOR application. It's part of the VIKTOR CLI application.
Exactly.
when
So
somebody
we
installs
install a known
Yeah.
a known SDK.
Sorry, maybe it wasn't clear to me, but is the code mod automatically created, or are you?
No.
But I mean, I could imagine that I mean the program knows your changes as well, and the changes you've made with naming and.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. Yeah. I'm not sure if so I can imagine that sometimes you know that the change is not relevant. Maybe. I'm not sure if it might create a lot of noise. I'm not sure if there's something that automatically detects that you could do like create code mod Pandas 0.1, 0.2, right? That's what you're
You're
suggesting.
probably using Pydantic, and you could probably make a code mod generator on your data classes.
Maybe, yeah.
Next meeting.
I think so the first step for us to consider something like that would be to go through our current handily written code mods and see like how much overlap is there and how default is this. Because I am afraid that there is not so much. That it is still, that it could still be, in this case we want this, in the other case we want that. So I'm not, but I never tried. I never
Probably say.
But even to pick the default for this extra argument, you need to understand what the default will do and which of the default settings represents the current expected behaviors. This would be very hard to automate.
Yeah, so in some cases it's also a bit difficult because we put stuff in. So there's another part of this story, and that's how does the function look in the library itself?
Yeah.
So will we put the argument there, or will it be a quark, which is not visible to the developers? There's a whole lot of things that you can do there as well. So especially if you reorder arguments and stuff like that, so you move from 3 to 2 required arguments or the other way around, you can shuffle them all you want, and then in a decorator shuffle everything back again, and the developer doesn't feel that the old code still works, but it has a new signature. So that's Python is very awesome in that respect, that you can do everything, but I think it makes it very difficult to analyze that and automatically generate the code mod with the right outcome. But yeah, in terms of renaming, I would say that's definitely possible, and maybe shifting imports as well. But then with imports again, so we had the problem with the imports. We shifted the structure of our SDK around. You can import it from multiple levels. So you can import the module, or import the function, import the class, you name it. There's a whole lot of options there. So yeah, it will be interesting to see.
Import star.
I'm gonna burn my hands on that. Any other questions? No? Okay, cool.
Great, thank you. Can you switch your room back to the screen share? Oh, that was quick. We're getting better at this. I think we're doing pretty good for our first online virtual hybrid meetup. But yeah, here's the.
Thanks. So now a not so technical story, but a use case, which might also be interesting. So I call it Python to keep your feet dry, and it will be clear once I start this presentation what it's really about. So just a short introduction. Who am I? So I'm Rob van Putten. I've been working in civil engineering for about more than 20 years now. And so I don't have a degree in computer science. I started civil engineering, but when I was 12, my father bought a Commodore 64. That's how old I am. And that's when I started to type some code. And I started with basic, 10 print Rob, 20 go to 10. I got all the Robs on the screen, which was great. During study, I went to Object Pascal. I worked for a company who wrote software in Delphi. I started my own company with a friend, and we made software in Qt and C++. And then about, I think 10 years ago, I met Python, which actually changed a lot in my life. And as you probably all know, you're all developers, there's always some kind of eagerness to find new languages and to start new stuff. So I'm also always looking into other languages like Rust or, yeah, you know how it goes. But we're talking about Python. And one thing which is actually quite important in this hypersensitive area that we're living in, or the hypersensitive times that we're living in. The thing on the left side, you might call it a dike, but some people get unexpected behavior when they hear the word dike, especially in America. So let's keep it at levee, which is all the international word that we can use. So if I talk about a levee, what I mean is that green thing on the left side that keeps the water out and keeps our feet dry. And we have a lot of levees. Maybe you don't know. I hear that there are some engineers here in the audience and they probably are not impressed by this number, but maybe the others are. We have more than 18,000 kilometers of levees and we need them. If you look at the left image, you see that we live in a country that's, well, largely below sea level. The dark blue is immediately below sea level, so that would be flooding if you remove the levees of our country. And the light blue area would also be flooded, even though it's not below sea level, but it's because of the rivers. And if you think of levees, they're not all the same. I mean, the one on the left side, or where the cursor is right now, thank you for that. I don't know how it happened, but very good. That's a real large levee. It's around the rivers like the Rhine, or the Maas, or the Waal. So they're really big. But you also have small levees on the right side, and there are just minor ones, but still, all these kilometers, 18,000, we have to assess the safety of these levees, because if they break, we have a problem. Now, I'm not going to give you a geotechnical engineering lecture right now, but I'm going to tell just a little bit about what happens. So this is the majority of stuff that we look at, and this is called the inward slope stability. And what it is that, like, you put a cross section, you just cut through the soil and you make a model out of this, and then it calculates this black line, which stands for the slope surface or the slip surface. And what it means is that if this levee would fail, according to the model, it would probably go like along this line. And then you get some unreadable safety factor right here, and that needs to be above a certain threshold. That's how we assess our levees. And we make thousands of these calculations. And the key ingredients, as you can imagine, are what soil is beneath my feet. If I stand on a levee, is it clay? Is it peat? Is it sand? We don't know. Other stuff that we need to know, how high is the levee currently? And we need to put that in the model. And the last thing that we have to do, we have to find the calculation parameters, like what is the maximum river, the water level in the river or in the ditches. So these are the key things, the key ingredients that we need to make such a assessment. And don't worry, I will get towards Python, but just a little bit more. So how do we get those key ingredients? Well, first of all, the soil. We have a lot of options to find out what's beneath our feet, but this is, well, one of the most used, and it's called a cone penetration test. And it's like a pencil, you push it into the ground, and you feel the pressure at the tip, and you also feel the friction of the soil around the cone, so like here. And then you get nice charts like that. And as a developers, yeah, we're always interested in what's the real data that I get out of it. And as you can see, it's a simple ASCII file, so you can easily read it using Python and interpret it and make charts out of it. And as it happens, of course, with Python, if something is repeated by someone and another one, someone makes a package. I made one, but it's this one is a lot better. It's PyGraph, so if you're interested, have a look at that. It actually uses some Rust bindings, so that's also interesting. And using this package, it's really easy to say, okay, I have my data, I read it in, and I convert that data using the package to soil layers. So there you got my soil layers. So I have this clay, I have the peat, etc. The second part, how do we get the geometry of the levee, which the current height of the levee? We used to do that with surveyors. They went out and they took measurements and they came back and they gave you a file or an Excel file, whatever. But we are also very fortunate in the Netherlands. We have our AHN, it's called, which is the general height data of the Netherlands for the entire country, well, almost the entire country. And you can easily find it online. And if you don't have it, well, a friend of mine started a company. He says, okay, Rob, you want to have some data of the height? I send out my drone and I come back and you get a file with the height data flown in by a drone. So it's really easy to get that data currently. And of course, again, since we're all developers, we like to know, how do we do that? Well, you can download those raster files, you know, those orange rectangles. They are like files, geotiff files, geotiff. And then you use a package like Rasterio, Shapely, NumPy to get the data out of it. And some nice people from Acris already created the REST APIs. You can use the URL that you simply get your data as well. So that's also relatively easy. Maybe the most difficult part is how to get parameters, like which is the maximum water level in the river or in the ditches. Because, yeah, if you look at a regular company, they store it in Word documents, they store it in a database, a small one, maybe even in a notepad document. It's not always that structured. If you're a little bit lucky, but I think it's still unlucky, you can use Excel. And if you're lucky, then it's probably stored in a geographical information system, hopefully in a database, and you can access it, of course, with Python. So then it comes down to behind this one, it says read lines. Take it from me. Yep, that's it. So you can use that to read the file. And actually, I heard people talking about Excel. I personally do not really like Excel, which is an understatement. So what I usually do is I convert it to a CSV file and then I read it just simply by using the simple Python syntax. But mostly, if I have it, I convert it and I write it into a database. Then I use a package like Psycho PG2, which is a scary name sometime, Psycho, but anyway. And then we use the nice SQL statements to get that data out of the database. Traditionally, if you look back when I started with civil engineering and we made a model like that, finding the data, inputting the data, so the soil layers, you had to do it manually. You had to find the data, you had to make the lines manually in your model, in your user interface. You had to manually click all the points that the surveyor gave you. And you also had to manually put in the water levels, etc. And this took from 4 to 8 hours. And imagine you have to do 1,000 of those calculations. That's a lot of hours. And today, we can do it completely automated. Well, sometimes I say, but I will get back to that later. I mean, if you have the CPT data that I told you about, you can use a package to interpret the data and simply make that geometry. If you have the AN data or you have the surveyor data, you can also automatically add that to your soil layers and cut out with Shapely, for example, those polygons that you need. And finally, if you have the database, you can create that line that says, here's the water. And this can all be done again automatically. And even better, the company that made this software that we use mostly in the Netherlands, it's by Deltares, so it's in Delft, quite close by. And they were so nice to create an API over their software. So you can even create the model, but also run it without using the user interface. You can create a script, it will create the model, it will generate the outcome of the calculation, and you can read it back in. And that's just done. This is my own code somewhere in my library that I have. And yeah, it's really nice. I mean, you can do anything that you want and just make the model and it will run it for you. So looking back, what has Python ever done for us? To paraphrase Monty Python, well, a lot actually. I mean, creating geometries out of raster files. I'm just going to skip that because you can read it yourselves, but there's so many possibilities, like machine learning, also really interesting. correlations between the CPT and the actual soil layers, you can do it with Python. We can generate and even calculate the models. We're thinking about accessing IoT data like a sensor that measures the actual water level in your levee, and it could be coupled to the model. And yeah, from 8 hours to 1 second, that's quite an impressive statement. So why do I say can? Well, because we are not living in utopia, and things like data quality really matter. So if you look at the high data, sometimes you have those really weird spikes. And if you automatically do all the calculations, you will have really funny looking models. So you have to find something like artificial intelligence or maybe just simple algorithms to try and find a way to remove those spikes, but in a way that it makes sense, because maybe the spike is really there. It's always difficult. Other thing that I think, and I'm talking for myself, engineers like to feel in control. They know if a computer makes a certain kind of a decision, they want to say, oh, I want to override that decision. I think it's 3 centimeters less. That's an engineer in an average. Another problem, data availability. If you look at larger companies, data availability is a problem. I mean, we have Excel files, but we don't have databases. And if we have databases, we put them behind a firewall and it's there. And if you want to access it, yeah, no way. Maybe in a year they make something. It's not an API, so it's really hard to access the data. Other problems are people in companies, well, not everybody speaks Python, and they still want to use their own way of working, which is actually like the same, the next point, old-fashioned management. I'm really disappointed in the current engineering companies. I don't take it personally, but my God, is this a state that we are in today? We could be so much more advanced. But yeah, it's I guess it takes time. And there are probably more reasons. But I think it takes time, maybe another generation, I don't know. But we're slowly getting there, I'm sure. Then for me, so what's my experience with Python? I think it's the best language to really super fast development. It's Python enables that. It's really easy to write the code. I mean, try it in C++ and you have all the pointers, the problems, and Python, yeah, it has its problems because it is that easy. But yeah, for super fast development, Python is an excellent language. For me personally, I started doing tests, like unit tests or PyTest, only 2 years ago, when my package really became unmaintainable. And I thought, oh my God, I changed something, but I don't know what had happened to the other locations of my code. So if you're new to Python or if you're working on a package and you think, testing, please add it to your code. It's really important. Same applies to documentation. I mean, Sphinx, and it makes a really nice document out of it. So there's no need to skip that. It's not as bad as it used to be. Then a really important question for me, to open source or not to open source. I'm a big fan of open source. I have a lot of code that I would like to share, but then I get, people in company A, they're making money out of it, and I have written the code for them, and I don't even hear a thank you. So yeah, I think that's really hard, but we could spend all night discussing that issue, but I'm curious about your thoughts about that. So far, I kept my package private because of that reason. Then another thing, I don't know if it's typical for a developer, but it's so hard to focus. I mean, you read on the internet, there's a new language. Well, it's not new, but maybe got more attention. And I want to try it. I want to try it out and see what happens and compare it with Python. So like Rust, it's something that I really would like to learn more about. The Unreal Game Engine, C++ again, maybe that's interesting as well. Go, yeah, great language, I think. And Flutter, I use Flutter because of the next point. I don't like web development with Python. I really don't, because you also have to know about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript most of the time. Not my cup of tea. And since I discovered Flutter, I thought, wow, this is great because it has all those things, but you can write in an object-oriented way, which is really nice. So, yeah, that's in a nutshell the reason why we keep our feet dry, but I got a little bit distracted about other points. Anyway, thanks a lot for listening to me. And if you have any questions, well, I'm here, or just contact me and not by Meta first, please. But so, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Very nice.
Yeah.
So let's see the questions.
How did you experience the transition going from an untested code base to tested code base?
It was a major step, really a major step. The thing that happened because I had to work with tests is because I started working together with other people. It was for Deltaris to build Geolib. I wrote part of that code. And then I found out that they were using tests, and I saw what they were doing with it, and it was a large code base in the end. You couldn't do that without tests. And so when I implemented that in my own packages, I see that I don't make breaking changes anymore because the test will have to run. And if I make a breaking change, I get warned in advance. And I also coupled it with CI/CD. So if I put it on GitHub, it will run that test. And you guys know that, but you get a red flag or whatever. And yeah, it was life changing.
Rewrite your library or?
Yeah, no, not really. No, it was
line methods, which are practically untestable.
Yeah. No, not that bad. But it was not no. You just created the test directory and put all the tests nicely. You had to write a lot of code because if you do it in the start, it's easy. You just do it. You write a class and you write the test code. But if you have to do it and you already have like 40 classes, then it gets annoying. So it's best to just at the start of the project also write the test code. So yes.
How do you make your engineers trust your tool?
Why
maybe a little background. I'm also like I was an engineer, let's put it that way. And then when I used to develop things with VIKTOR, it was always like I have my Excel, I trust it, but then it has 1,000 macros, and then how do you trust it?
Prijs recent niet op 20%.
It suddenly becomes a black hole. You know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, this is, I think, the hardest part to really get it to your colleagues.
Yeah.
And I don't know the solution. It's just, I think, a matter of time because younger people that get into the company and you say, I have an app for that. And you show the app, oh, right, and they use it and they don't ask any questions. But the older ones are like, yeah, but what does it do? And we have an Excel file for that. And we show, I don't want to change. That's really hard. But I'm not a manager, so I don't want to have anything to do with that. But the only thing I can do is show, okay, this is a benchmark, maybe 3 benchmarks, and just say, okay, here you can read what's happening in my code. Sometimes it's open source, so you can check the code and if they want. But yeah, that's the only way I can maybe get a little bit of trust, but never 100%. Yes.
Can you put a few slides back where you have the slide of the dike with the line? I did this one.
Yeah.
So my last name is Van Dijk, so I'm curious.
Yeah.
This line over here with the dot, is this actually the sliding, the forces, the slip circle, what happens, so you can see that this is what's going to happen?
Exactly. Yeah, it's
I was wondering about the line for a few minutes.
No, there are a lot.
There's online they have a bit of difficulty following the questions from the crowd.
Oh,
So if you could repeat the question, that would help them significantly.
I think you're sitting at the microphone, I guess.
I can also repeat it. That's also fine. I just missed this one though, so I'm sorry. Maybe you can say it.
So the question was what the black line was. I was first when I saw the graphic for the first time what the bent black line was, but then I saw the dot there and I realized that maybe it's the forces and the central line of the sliding in the circle, what will happen in the force. This is the major direction of where the collapse of the levee will go to.
Without going into too much, did I get it? Or do you still?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Without going into too much detail, you have different models because this is based on a circle. You always also have another one, which is a kind of a polyline. Doesn't matter, but it's quite simple. You have the midpoint here. This one is going down like the simple gravity. And this one is pushing back, so it's also simple gravity. Along this line, it calculates all these points, all these center points with all these tangent lines, that we call them. Yes, thank you. Almost real time. Anyway, it finds the one with the least resistance. But if you want to know more, this is getting annoying, so we'll have a personal talk.
There's an online question also.
Sure.
Is it Arjan asks this, is it possible to automate all possible failure mechanisms to conduct stability of dike in addition to macro instabilities, such as piping, rapid drawdown using this code?
Yeah, I mean, if we can have the mathematical formula, which we have, and of course there are a lot of things that are sometimes hard to automate, especially with piping, but this is getting really hard for the people who are not working in geotechnical engineering. But it's going to be hard to find certain points, but it is doable. So yeah, I don't see any problems making complete automated calculations and assessments with all the failure mechanisms.
Another question from Arjan, who says, thanks for the answer. Another question, can this code be implemented in Pluxus?
Can this code be implemented? Well, yes, the funny thing is, in my code, I'm not making a model like this. I'm making like a generic model, which can be ported to this software, but I also, it's just polygons and some other information. So I can make a Pluxus calculation out of it as well.
What is Pluxus?
Yeah, that's now it's getting really hard. It's the same as this, but with a different model. It's called finite element methods, which is a different cup of tea than this analytical method. But let's keep the boring mathematics out of this presentation.
And then one question from my side: would you be willing to share or cooperate on that intermediate representation in polygons? Because by chance, that's exactly what I had been working on just before I left.
Yeah. It is actually a thing that I've been working on, which separates me from the rest of the people who already have the code. But we can talk about it. It's the same discussion about open source or not open source. I would love to open source that library because it will benefit definitely from other people. But yeah, I've spent so many hours, so many years actually on this code slowly. So yeah, but we can have that discussion. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
No problem.
Fine.
That's the microphone, right?
Correct.
Okay, yeah.
But I heard no complaints so far. So.
And now the sound of beers will maybe interrupt.
I'll keep it quiet.
So if you're at home, take a beer if you like. Come around me.
Reinhard, openen. Nog openen liggen.
En nog andere mensen hier lopen naar.
Doe wij er nog eens.
Normaal? Ja, normaal.
Oh, Reinhard, iedereen zit in de olie. Dus,
And everybody's an engineer because they're discussing percentages. About the beer, I think.
Maybe somebody can make a package for them.
Yeah, everybody set? So my name is Reinhard Vrees. I'm going to give a short presentation on updating old websites or other old Python projects, but with Docker. Who has used a bit of Django before? and who has used a bit of a Docker? More, yeah, okay. Well, let's continue with all the wet water. If I cycle to work from Nieuwegein to Utrecht, I cross the Amsterdam-Rijn Canal. And then I cycle along the Merwede Canal, which was the predecessor of the Amsterdam-Rijn Canal. And then in the center of Utrecht, there's the Oude Gracht, which was a bit of the predecessor of the predecessor. Yeah, it always sounds nice if I say, hey, we have an office in the center of Utrecht. I could also say, hey, we have an office above the McDonald's. It sounds doesn't sound nice. It's in the center.
Next to the sewer.
Well, it's not that bad. But okay, yeah, the old center with the Oude Gracht, that's nice, but sometimes you have to have a more modern or wider or newer canal. And the same with websites. You have to update them from time to time. So I knew it was behind the previous talk. So keep the Netherlands dry enough by sometimes making it a little bit more wet. Yeah, this is a German example from the Mosel River. We had floods last year in July in the south of the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany. In the Netherlands, it was mostly also the main river, the Maas. But actually, it was okay. There were no major problems near the big river. It was in the province Zuid-Limburg itself, but they had some problems. But the river Maas was actually okay. Sometimes you had a margin of 10 or 20 centimeters, but yeah, there were no major disasters. And one of the things they did was to have, well, I called it dike, okay, levee. You could do levee improvements like making the higher or wider. That's not always nice for your village or for your house that's on the levee. You can also give the river more room. So you can remove obstacles like old brick factories that are often next to the river, or reuse an old river bend just to give the river more room. Because if it's hemmed in by levees on both sides, yeah, the water can't go anywhere. If you're allowed to spread out a little bit more, then top of the high river, the high water mark gets lowered a bit, it all gets evened out. Yeah, but removing those obstacles or doing major civil engineering works near a river also means you have to talk to the people who live there. So we were asked to make a website for Rijkswaterstaat some 10 years ago or so for communicating with the municipality. So they used the website to go to all the municipalities along the river and show them this calculation. So you had several scenarios for how much rain is there going to be, how warm is it going to be, etc. And at the top you had a graph that showed in meters, in this scenario there'll be some 80 centimeters more, what will be 80 centimeters higher than the levee. So you have to drag down that line by clicking on measures, so the dots in the graph below it. So you could, some people from the municipality, okay, let's click on removing this brick factory. Nah, doesn't do much. Okay, reuse the old river bend. Oh, that helps a lot. It solves our problem and it solves the same problem for the next 10 or 20 kilometers. Hey, that's nice. So then you can, they used it to sell measurements to the municipalities along the river. Quite a lot of those measures were made, and that helped a lot last July, so I was pretty happy. Because, there were no big problems, which there would have been without. Well, we didn't design this website, we just built it, but But yeah, it was built 10 years ago or so, 8 years ago. It should run for 3 or 4 years. Oh, can you extend it for another year? It's pretty useful. Can you extend it another year? Oh, can you extend it one last time for another year? Now it's the really, really last time. Can you extend it? And last July, they also wanted to have it extended for another year. So you have a really old website with an old Ubuntu, an old Python version, and you have to update it. The key for me was to do it in incremental steps. I have some pull requests. This one was from 2018, updated Django in 1.11. 2 years ago, I updated Python 2 to Python 3. A week later, updated the Django version, and last year, I updated the Django version again. So what do you do during such an update, especially the first one? It's on an old Linux server with an old Ubuntu version, and your laptop probably has a much newer one. Yeah, you can just install all the new stuff and see if it runs, but you'll get a lot of import errors and it's hard to figure it out. So what we did was we made a Docker image with the old Ubuntu version, installed a couple of the Python packages that we, the Ubuntu Python packages that we needed and that were installed, and basically try to rebuild the entire website as much as possible in an identical state to what's on the server. And it's all nicely specified in a Docker file, so you know exactly what you're doing. And okay, then you run it on your laptop and on the server. Yeah, looks the same, works the same. Okay, then you have a starting point. So you first make sure it runs. And one extra measure I would take is, okay, if you're using Django, pick the latest release of your old version. Because the latest small fixes are in there, and also deprecation warnings. Because yeah, things are changing between versions. And often you don't want warnings and errors when you run your program. But in Python, you can enable deprecation warnings, Python -WA or environment variable. Python warnings as always. And then suddenly Python will start complaining to you, hey, you're using this old Python method, which is going to go away, Python 3.4, 3.5. And also Django, hey, you're importing this, well, that's going to be moved in the next version. Or, hey, you're using this old field, it's going to be renamed. So everything that you would have to figure out manually when you just updated everything and just got a bunch of errors at a non-working site, Python and Django are just willing to tell you. So just enable those warnings and fix them all, because yeah, it will save you work later on. Next stage, so we have a working website. Yeah, update the Ubuntu version to the next one. You also get a new Python version, and check that the site still runs. Yeah, it's not much harder than that, and yeah, you can use the same for your own different kinds of Python projects. Probably at this time you need to update 1 or 2 libraries that don't work with the newer Python version, because yeah, at that time you have to do this. The website is 4 years old. Fix the deprecation warnings again. The last step, upgrade Django. If you use Django, you know that for upgrading they say, okay, move from version to version. So 2.0, 2.1, 2.2. But every third version is a long-term support version. Well, if you have, in my experience, removed all the deprecation warnings, solved them all, you can just go to the next long-term support version, which saves quite a lot of time. You do have to browse through all the change logs in previous versions. And sometimes you miss something, but yeah. And when you upgrade Django, especially when you haven't maintained the website for 4 years, there are a lot of extra libraries and plugins that you're using that don't work with the new version anymore. So unpin as much as possible old versions and just update everything, all the libraries to newer versions. And normally that won't give you too many errors. Sometimes you swap something out, but at least the problem that you might have is very localized to, oh, I just upgraded Django, and not, is this erroring because I upgraded Django or the Python or the Ubuntu? Or, so you limit the amount of places where you have to look for errors or solutions. Yeah, this is one of the examples from Python 3. So yeah, we just changed some Python versions to the list of Ubuntu apt-get install thingies, and yeah, try to get it working. Again, so yeah, that was basically it.
Yeah, I was wondering, why did you actually update the website?
The question is, why did we update the website? Because we wanted to keep it reasonably safe. Being at the moment, at a certain time, we were running on Ubuntu 14.4, which is now out of support for 2.5, 3 years or so. You don't really want it. And also important, if you update a website or a Python project within 3 or 4 years, it's doable. You can do it. But if you wait 8 years before you update a project, you sometimes can't even get it running anymore because your build tools and perhaps you use build out or pipenv and you want to move to pip, and you need an older setup tools to update your build package. And it doesn't run anymore. You new Python. We have one such a project where we just waited too long. We can only edit it literally on the server. That's the only place where it runs. We keep telling the customer, oh, please kill it. So we waited too long with that project. So in this project, we update it every year or every 2 or 3 years.
Never shut back up the whole server.
Okay.
Did you also consider deploying it with Docker?
Whether we were deploying it with Docker. In this case, yes. With Docker Compose in our case, so it's really simple and easy. Just a Docker with the Django website, a small Nginx, and I don't know if I also put the database inside the Docker on the same server. It's not really the best idea, but it works. Yes, at least I'm deploying often with Docker, but in a really simple way.
Yeah, nice. Thanks a lot for sharing your war stories. I was wondering if this experience, and maybe previous ones you had before as well in upgrading old code, has changed your attitude toward new projects. So sort of what kind of lessons do you take from these upgrades, maybe nightmares, but maybe also when it went very well? What kind of projects do sort of stand the time good in a good way?
Well, the main lesson I learned from all this was to not wait too long with updating. But also, there are several parts that you might need to update. You might have to move to a newer server version, but don't underestimate the tooling around it. Like, how do you install it? With pip, with virtualenv, pipenv or something. I now have 2 or 3 projects that I initially set up with pipenv, but it didn't work that well anymore, and I now want to move them to pip. But at the moment, I can't really update them because pipenv isn't really working. So I have an entire website which I cannot update because the tooling is a little bit too old. So it just takes 2 or 3 hours to update it to pip, and I'll do it somewhere later this week. So it's not just the actual Python code, but also the pip install stuff around it. Make sure you keep it a bit up to date, because if there's a problem, and you have to update it now because there's a security issue. Do you first have to fix the whole project, or can you do it? That's the main lesson, those two.
How far can you go back to previous, because Docker is not that new anymore. 14.4, 12.4?
I have not tried 12.4. I guess it's possible. 14.04, yeah, that's still, that's still around.
But before that, the only alternative would have been a virtual machine.
Yes. Yeah.
One experience I have here, I'm wondering would that have helped, is that as soon as you go into database drivers on a system, I ran into that issue. That, for example, we had an Informix server that we had to connect to, and then Informix got bought by IBM, and IBM said in two years, oh, we'll keep everything the same. After 2 years, they said, okay, we'll just drop all the client drivers that are there, and you can now use the new IBM DB2 database client drivers. And it was a nightmare in this kind of situation. Unfortunately, we had a data center with multiple versions and those kind of things. But I'm wondering if it then gets tricky with Docker.
Well, what gets tricky in such cases sometimes is simple, really simple stuff, like you have a very old, perhaps if there's a 12.04 Docker
image
or 14.04 with a old Python. Well, 14.04 already is a problem for very simple things, because there's Python 2.7.6 or so. That's the latest version on there, which doesn't support HTTPS servers with SME. So you have one server with multiple websites on them. You cannot get software from lots of the websites like pypi.org.
Well, it gets which site.
So you first somehow have to update the Django, the Python version in the official 14.04 Docker to actually be able to download stuff from PyPI. That's surprising. There are some ways around it, but that's the kind of mess you slowly get into, especially when you're inside a company which has an outgoing proxy. Yeah. So.
Zijn er reclaamstaat er ineens vuur?
Well, in this case, there's a well-meaning sysadmin thought it's a good idea to implement an outgoing proxy. And it cost me, it was a year ago, and it cost me 2 weeks during the entire year to work around issues. And I shouldn't complain about it. But when he last had to update a couple of Windows machines and run into problems after 5 minutes, he disabled the proxy for half a day and did the update. So he now knows it's not.
How Rexburg is in.
You can avoid company proxies. Just proxy over DNS and it always.
Any other questions?
Yeah, there was one online. Bert Bossink asks, why are you using a virtual env within the Docker container? You probably looked at one of your screenshots.
Mostly partially out of habit, because I'm used to using a virtual env, and but it is a bit weird to do a virtual env. Okay, yeah. I thought that people did a virtual env that included the system-wide packages, but that was 2 years earlier. Then it would have been even weirder. The main reason why I do it is it's habit, and I always work from within the Python directory, and I'm used to having bin/Python being the right version, bin/ all the other binaries I install. I'm used to having them in the directory and not in user local bin. So yeah, it's not really needed, but yeah, good catch.
Well,
yeah, we've been talking about the codemods previously, so I was curious, was there also a lot of manual labor involved in doing all these changes? I can imagine that for other libraries as well, with the upgrade name change. And was that a problem for you?
No, it was not a problem. You have a lot of manual changes like the ones in this sheet. So the question was, you have to do a lot of manual changes. Would perhaps a code mod help with it? For instance, Django changed, well, every 4 years or so, Django changes the way it names the middleware classes. Yeah, it's some kind of Django concept, or adds new ones. Yeah, it's a good moment to copy paste the current default list from the Django documentation and review why you had the other ones in there, and do you still need them? Yeah, sometimes, yeah.
Do you also mean that like the automated way in that sense sort of deprives you from actual learning what is the new thing and to reason about it, right? You lose something maybe if you automate it completely away.
I've made a couple of tools myself that automate away quite a lot of stuff, so I'm all for automating things. This one might be a little bit hard to automate.
for just the renaming things, okay, but mostly these things are not simple renames, but are functionality changes and other things where you really have to understand what's there. So then, of course, in your setting with VIKTOR AI, you know you want to communicate to your customers like a default value changed. We'll first do this and then that. But in Django, in general, a lot more changes between releases, all small, tiny things, but mostly they are functional or security related or other things where you really have to understand why it's there. You have to check in your code around what you're calling, how it's used.
Yeah. Not sure I totally agree with it, because if you use quite a lot of just plain standard Django, not too much changes. It's the little details that sometimes are changed, but if you just use the normal views and models and the standard Django stuff, yeah, it's okay. It helps to have a good editor to quickly. I mean, you don't want to type everything by hand, but a bit of some elaborated search and replace thingy really helps.
There's been a lot of talk like in the community of using actually the reason MyPy was invented was for the Dropbox to annotate their Python 2 code to make it easier to migrate it to Python 3. Did you also consider using type annotations and static code analysis for let's say for your code?
Whether we use type annotations in Python or Django, for some of the newer projects, because in the newer projects we try to use it, because you can enable your tests to run with the checks enabled, and that sometimes uncovers errors. And that's basically the whole, for me, that's the whole point about type annotations. I mean, okay, they have a documentation value, but it prevents some errors. Like, okay, I'm now passing in a string where there should be a date time, for instance, or hey, I pass in a number. Oh, wait, it came from some config file and it's still a string instead of an integer. Those kinds of errors you can pick out with static code checking with types. And you can add it to parts of a library even instead of the whole library, and slowly start building up. So, kind of like it, but yeah.
It's also used at least as a, I think there's automatic type stuff generation tools.
Monkey type or something.
Monkey type and also Python stuff. I think there's multiple. I think Google made one and Dropbox made one that you could use in your Python 2 environment. And so when as soon as you get it up and running, you can use it to automatically add type annotations to the existing code. And then use that as a basis for updating. So at least that's a strategy that other companies have used.
Okay, yeah.
But then they had maybe 1 million or 10 million lines.
Yeah, for us it's mostly Django apps like, well, we have much more elaborate stuff, but yeah.
When you test coverage, does it include now a path all the way to deployment? So do you build to a Docker container and run it and check that Django actually runs behind your Nginx config as part of your normal test suite?
So the question is, how elaborate is our test suite?
Well, my question is, do you run it all the way to the way it would be, as close as you can get it to deploy? So for instance, run it inside at least a Docker container?
No, the test that we run is basically just a Docker build.
Yeah.
Because that's needed to run the tests. And for a website like this, we hope we get 50-60% test coverage or something like it.
Yeah.
I have a library that updates our main HTML proxy where all the traffic comes in and is given to the 50 or so websites. Well, that is a 99.9% code coverage. But yeah, for a website like this, if it doesn't run, the customer will call us or we will notice it. They are not websites that are used 24/7. They're used a couple of times a day, and they do have to run, and they do run.
Yeah. My point is, if you had that path, then what you could try there is you could unpin the versions there, and as a sort of you could run that ahead, right? So you could go into the next Ubuntu version there and already know what trouble is coming your way without much effort if you built it to that.
Theoretically, yes, you could do that. That's a lot of work. Especially also because we have various websites on various Django versions.
Yeah.
Not all of them are in Django. We have these are all single server smaller websites. But we also have websites running on 10 servers at the same time. So many differences. It's difficult to have time, or it's difficult to invest in too much automation for one specific website that you can also update by doing 1 or 2 days of work once a year.
Especially if it's billable. Yeah.
Yes, it's billable.
The business case here is that you want it to break, so the customer is finally paying you for keeping it alive for too many years.
And we are also using CI/CD to get also Django set up. You're using those also to update it. And nowadays we're using CI/CD, and for every merge we spin it, review environment. And we are using GitLab, so every person involved in the project can check the review project in the cloud. And this, Docker is quite easy to set it up. Yeah, Docker Compose is making our life a lot easier.
Yeah. If you use it in the right way, it's like, you can do so many fun.
Especially if let's encrypt.
Yeah. Well, we also have dashboards that are. Dashboards, Plotly, all the Jupyter notebook stuff. There's Plotly also for Quas. They have some dashboards on the fly Python generating Flask code. you don't want to look at the code that comes out of it, but you have a dashboard. And yeah, that gets built into a Docker container, and we have a Django compose running on a server with Watchtower. That's an app some company made that watches, okay, which Dockers do you have deployed? And if one of them, I'll check if there's an update. So it does it every 5 minutes. So if the automatically build updated the Docker file on GitHub, hey, let's pull it in and run it. So there's quite unsecure code, but yeah, nobody's logging into the server and it's all firewalled away. And Docker Compose just updates it all the time when needed. And it's the kind of fun stuff you can do with half a day of work. Not funny.
Yeah, so
am I finished?
thank you very much. I think it's time to wrap up our session. I'd like to thank everybody, especially all our speakers, but also all our guests online, and like for attending. And I had fun. I learned a lot. I have a few questions I want to ask, but I'll ask them during having a beer, because I don't know what time we have to leave.
What you want?
What we want. Great. So let's say goodbye to our online audience, and I hope you liked it. I see there's still some people online. Let's see if they actually leave now. They all fell asleep behind the screen.
Maybe guys, before they leave, if it's okay if I because I'm also from VIKTOR, by the way. So maybe there was some word about our product, and of course we didn't talk too much about it. But what we wanted to say is, if you want to try our product, you can just see it online, VIKTOR.ai. But everybody here, we can just offer you a free version to use VIKTOR, so you can just try it out how the SDK works. So if you're interested in that, then you can just send an email to Anande. Maybe we can leave it in the chat, his email address, and then everybody can just send him an email, and we can give you a development license, and you can just play around with our platform. And of course, if you're then interested in using it, let us know. So that's sort of what I wanted to say when still the people are there. So maybe someone can put Anande's email address in the chat. Sam is doing it now, and we'll write it down here, and then you can just send it. Okay, thanks.
Great, yeah. So while we're at wrapping up, I want to say a really big thank you to VIKTOR, especially to Tamar, for organizing this all, and meal, drinks, everything, chairs, and a nice room. So thank you. I want to organize the next meetup with a bit more, let's say, with a bit less of a gap. So not in 2 years, but hopefully let's say in 3 months. But I need two things. I need a location and somebody willing to sponsor, and I need some people willing to share something interesting. So if you have, if you work at a company maybe close by the central station, and you have a nice room, that would be brilliant. And of course, I will try to get a meetup in a room where there's actually robots printing Python logos and stuff while we're there. But I still need to talk to people about it once I started. So hopefully, and that will be in Delft. But we've done a meetup in Delft before, and I think probably half the audience has studied in Delft. I think so. Yeah. So hopefully, see you next time soon, and there will still beer in the fridge, so nobody has to leave. At least you don't have to leave. You can stick around a bit. So yeah, that's up. Let's wrap it up.